And we had just a series of murder-suicides involving husband, wife, father, and their kids. And it was all within this 10-week period. And I was like, man, what are people thinking? What are we doing here?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Josh Lustig Podcast, where we're diving deep into stories, lessons, and principles that help us grow in business, leadership, and even just regular life. Today we have an incredible guest, someone who has dedicated his life to serving and protecting our communities. Chief Tracy, the head of Meridian, Idaho's Police Department, joins us to share his journey from his early days as an officer to leading one of the largest police forces in the state with hundreds of officers under his command. We'll discuss what it really takes to be a great cop, the importance of communication and leadership, and how culture can make or break an organization. But the conversation goes much further than just law enforcement. It's about values, resilience, and just the power of making a difference in real people's lives. Whether you're in, a business or public service, or even just trying to be a better human. Chief Tracy has firsthand experience in leadership transformation, mentorship, and the kind of decision-making that can save lives. If you've ever wondered what it takes to build a strong team, navigate real challenges, and truly lead by example, then you won't want to miss this episode. So buckle up. This is going to be a powerful conversation. Let's get right into it. Really appreciate you being here. And I know, from my understanding, you've been through a lot. You have started out as a cop. You've been involved with a bunch of DEA type stuff, if I understand. A lot of interesting stories I'm really excited to unpack. Just thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. It's my pleasure for sure.
First question out the gate. Chief, you are now the chief of one of the larger police departments in Idaho, in Meridian here near Boise. And I imagine that it's a lot different, that role, than when you first started. So I guess tell me, how does that evolve? Meridian's a lot bigger than it used to be as well. So how did you even get into this? How did it all happen? Running a campaign, because you don't have to be elected to be?
Not for chief.
No,
we're
not
appointed.
For chief.
Yeah.
So
we're
how
appointed
did that all
by
come
the
to
mayor
be?
and the city council. So.
Gotcha.
Well, it's kind of interesting. So growing up, I knew I either wanted to be a police officer or I wanted to be a high school teacher and a wrestling coach. So that was where I was at as I was getting into my senior year of high school. And my brother was a police officer, had been a police officer in our hometown, and then was ended up retiring as a sergeant with the Boise Police Department.
Oh, neat.
And so he gave me some really great advice, the only good advice he's ever given me. I will point that out. And
on the record.
On the record. But he told me, he said, listen, if you want to be a police officer, he said, don't get your degree in criminal justice, because if you decide you don't like being in the police world, there's really not much you can do with that degree. He said, get your degree in education, and that way, if you decide you want to go back and teach and coach, you'll be able to do that. Or if you decide you want to just go into teaching, then you're taken care of. So I came to Boise State and was doing a lot of ride-alongs with my brother, was doing my student teaching at an alternative school, and went through that process. And really at the time, they weren't really holding the kids accountable like I thought they should be. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, I just don't know if I want to get into this process where, when you tell somebody you need to do these things to be successful and they're not doing them, what's going to happen when they get out in the real world? Sure. And they fell. When we've kind of given them this false sense of, you don't really have to do the work if we just want to move you along. And also during that time, I'm doing a ride along with my brother one night, and we get a call to a vehicle burglar. And we roll up on this guy in the north end, and the guy bolts, and I bolt out of my brother's patrol car, and I tackle this guy in the front yard of this place, and my brother's sergeant pulls up at the time.
Oh, no
and
way.
he is not very happy. I mean, he may or may not have dropped the F-bomb at my brother, wanting to know what was going on. And my brother was like, I couldn't stop him. That guy ran and he was out of the car before I could yell at him not to chase him. And so really after that, I was like, man, this is pretty cool. This is fun. This is something that I think that I want to explore further and go into. And Meridian happened to be hiring at the time, and I went and tested. And at that time, when you tested for a police officer position, you would have several hundred people there to test. I mean, it was packed. Okay. Today, not so much. And so went out, ended up making the cut and getting hired by Meridian, and was really very fortunate. Came into the department at the time. It was pretty small. We maybe had 20 some officers at the time, very small farming community, starting to make that transition and kind of trying to grow. And I mean, it was small enough. I always laugh. I talk about working graveyards in the wintertime, and there would be no cars out after 10 o'clock at night, and definitely nothing after midnight driving around little old Meridian. So
sounds like where I'm from.
Yeah.
Like,
so exactly like Cottonwood. So when you were on patrol, you're out driving and you would see tire tracks and you're like, oh, somebody's up to no good. Yeah. We're going to go out there. We're going to make a traffic stop in the middle of the night. And invariably it was usually the newspaper delivery people, but
yeah, you're like, that's kind of a letdown.
But
like,
you got to stop them driving on the wrong side of the road and at least have a conversation because you're about to fall asleep on a graveyard.
Yeah, that's why in like a small town, you can't get away with anything because, at the end of the day, it's like speeding is your worst problem. It's like, what a nice problem to have.
Yeah, exactly.
Compared to a lot of places.
Yeah.
So like, okay, there was 20 cops in the police department when you started. How many, just for reference, roughly or now?
We're allotted 152 officers right now. So
wow.
We have about just over 200 total employees, including our professional staff. So
that's crazy. So what are some skills? I have two questions. I'll ask them side by side. But first question is, what kind of skills do you really look for in a good cop? And then we'll talk about what skills do you have to have now from a leadership standpoint. But
well, for sure, I think the biggest thing we want to look for in a cop is a good person.
Just like their character?
Their character. We really, at our agency, we really hit on that character piece because I always tell everybody, if you come to me with bad character, it's too late for us to change and turn you into a good person. But we can take a really good person and turn them into a great cop.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so we really try to look for those, the big skills. The biggest one is communication. If you can talk to people, if you can relate to people, this job is so much easier than if you don't. And how you treat people is important.
See, I that's really on brand for this podcast because what we're trying to do, Chief, is inspire and really teach the skills that are not taught in schools right now to the next generation, Gen Z. And that's really helpful to hear because I'm a big proponent of communication. What do you tell yourself in your own brain, and also how do you communicate with other people? So you're saying to be a good cop, I would have probably guessed the answer was going to be something along the lines of, discipline, something along the lines of you have all these different things that would make a good cop, and you come out and say communication and being able to actually talk to people. Do you see that people that like cops that have that skill, do they have like better stats? I don't know what stats you guys track on cops, but
well, we track stats, but I think what you find with police officers that communicate well is you don't get a lot of complaints on them.
Yeah.
Right. If you have officers that are really here to serve their community and they are really here to make sure that we're trying to make people's lives better, which is really our job, right?
Sure.
Our job is really to take care of the most vulnerable people in society. And if that's really your goal, you're going to be successful at this job. Yeah. You're not going to have a lot of complaints. You're going to be liked by your peers. You're going to be liked by your community. They're going to support you when you need their support. And I think that's one of the unique things here with the Meridian Police Department is we have controversial things happen from time to time. There's no doubt about it. Police officers make mistakes. We're human beings. But this community really seems to rally around our department rather than try to tear it down and make wild accusations and paint us with this broad brush like you see across the country.
Yeah.
And so for me, it is really, I'm looking for somebody that, do you want to serve people? And you'd mentioned discipline. And yeah, we instill discipline in our academy, but our academy isn't a stress academy. We're not going to sit there and scream and yell at you like you're in the Marine Corps or something like that. Because I'm a firm believer that, one, we're not building soldiers. We're building police officers. We're building problem solvers. And so if I treat you really poorly within the four walls of my organization, when you get a little bit of power yourself, it is almost inevitable that you're going to wield that power and you're going to treat somebody the way you were treated. And so I think that's really a difference that you see in the way different police agencies do things.
Yeah.
You know, I always tell everybody, listen, when it comes time to use force, we're going to use force and we're going to win that confrontation. But when the suspect is done resisting arrest, we're done using force, and you're going to dust them off. And you're going to treat them like the human being they deserve to be treated with, right? You're going to treat them with the dignity and respect every human being deserves. And you'd be amazed at how far that goes, even in the process when you're going to court and when you're doing those types of things, that when you really kind of take that service attitude and that caring about your agency and your community, all of a sudden, even people that you're having maybe what would be considered negative contacts end up can be really positive for those people. And so we've had people come back to our department that have been sent to jail, that have come to officers and said, hey, you know what? You turned my life around because you did X, Y, and Z. And for me, that was one of the most fulfilling things for me is I've had when I put my name out as wanting to be the next chief in the Meridian Police Department, I had people that I sent to prison that actually wrote letters of recommendation for me to our city council and to our mayor. That made a big deal.
Somewhere deep, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It you don't realize the impact you have on people until you realize the impact you had on people.
Yeah.
And it really hit home for me when I ran into a police officer at a conference, and I was looking at him and I was like, man, I recognize this guy, but I'm not sure where. And he came to me and he said, hey, you don't remember me, do you? And I was like, man, you look really familiar. But he said, you were one of my instructors in the academy. You taught officer survival. And he said, you saved my life. And I was like, I didn't save your life. I don't know. And he said, no. He said, when I got shot, the things that you told me and to not let someone take me away from my family and to focus on that survival so I'm there for them, he goes, got me through that shooting and being wounded.
Wow.
He works for the Nampa Police Department. That shooting happened several years before. He didn't bother to pick up the phone and say, hey, by the way.
Yeah.
Didn't drive over to say. And so what it brought home to me is when we have a positive impact on people, we may never know that positive impact on them. But when we have a negative impact on people, everybody's going to know about it, right? They're going to tell the world how negative their interaction with the Meridian Police Department was, or the Meridian, this specific officer. And so it really kind of changed my shift in thinking a little bit. And so when I talk to my son, I tell him all the time, man, remember, every contact you have with someone, you have the decision to make it either a positive impact or a negative impact. Try to choose positive. And
you might not know the results.
You may never know the results. But man, wouldn't it be nice if every interaction I made, I tried to make positive, and somebody took that fork in the road and they took it a positive way. But how bad would you feel if that impact you had on them was negative and it takes them down the other path? So focus on that. And even in those situations where you think it may be, right, you're arresting someone, you can still have a positive impact on their life just by the way that you treat them and treating them like a human and trying to get them the help that you can get them.
That's almost biblical, like what you're talking about. I mean, unconditional love. I know that's not exactly what you said, but follow me on this for a second. Most people have never experienced unconditional love in their life. Even coming from good families, most people have always psychologically, subconsciously had this, if I do this, then I earn love and respect. And when somebody, I imagine, is a criminal, or maybe they're not even a criminal, maybe it's a first offense or whatever, and they did something that is illegal or potentially even immoral, and you're in a situation, I imagine you as a police officer have the opportunity to either treat them like dirt or do the same actions as far as physical, making sure the situation's controlled, but treat them with respect because they still are a human. Is that kind of what you're saying?
You hit it right on the head. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the biggest officer safety trait that we have. Is if you treat people well, they really are less likely then to hold a grudge against you or attack you, or maybe they get the upper hand on you.
Yeah.
And the decision on whether or not they're going to take your life or not may come down to their interactions they've had with you in the past, or even their interactions they've had with other officers.
Yeah.
And so I always try to remind our officers, remember the way you treat somebody now may affect another officer 10 steps down the line.
The whole brand.
Absolutely.
We are one brand, and it's unfortunate one apple can kind of spoil it. Well, something that just hit me really hard as you're talking, like this is helping me in my current life, this conversation, so thank you, is the idea that if something negative happens and you are responsible for that, you're going to know about it immediately. Everybody loves to write a bad review, it seems like. Yeah. I personally don't, but I mean, it seems like that's the case. But how often have you done something positive for someone and nobody ever says anything, and you find out like this guy 3, 5, 10, 20 years later, a compliment can change your life.
Absolutely.
I remember when I was a junior in high school, I always wanted to be a speaker. I like Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, kind of all the Earl Nightingale, some of these great orators of all time, right? And I remember I always wanted to be that, but I thought that I had a weird voice. I have kind of a unique voice. It's not a normal one. And I read at church one day. I was a lector, and I was up in front of all my classmates and the whole church, and I was reading, scripture during the church service. And one of the lectors, who was a staple of the community, he was a really deep voice, booming voice kind of a guy. I really respected him. He came up afterwards on my way to school, on the way out of the church, and he said, "Hey, Josh, I really think that you have a great voice, and I think you have something, there's something here. You should think about it." And I actually haven't told this story maybe ever. I kind of forgot about it until we just talked. A compliment changed my life. Yeah. Whether it was true or not actually doesn't matter. The fact is, he instilled a belief in me that day that did change my life. This gentleman has since passed away in a car accident and is a tragic story, but I owe a lot to him for my journey. So I think the lesson for me out of listening to you is, and maybe for anyone watching this, is if you see something or somebody helps you, tell them. And be like, that changed my life. And don't wait 10 years. Just tell them right now. Or if it happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago, go tell them. I don't know if that's...
Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the things I remind myself of a lot is nobody's self-made. That is such a myth. It drives me crazy. The self-made man, the self-made millionaire. Not one of us. Not one of us are self-made. Somebody has given us a helping hand up. Somebody's given us a compliment. Somebody's given us advice that has helped us. I had a friend that reached out, and I had forgotten all about it. Didn't even think about this. And he says, "Man, at a time was really hard in my life, and you guys loaned me your pickup because I needed some transportation." I didn't even remember it until he brought it up, and and he was a good friend. So why wouldn't we have done that? Yeah. But it made a huge difference for him. And he remembers that, right? And people also remember when we do bad things to them. And you mentioned, right, kind of being that unconditional, that, well, if I do this, then I get this. It's where we are in this world right now, I think. Everybody wants something for something. We've become so transactional as people and in this country. It's crazy. Just do things because they're the right thing to do. And
I love that. Say that again.
Just do things because it's the right thing to do.
And that's it. No other explanation needed. It's just the right thing to do. You actually remind me in a lot of ways some of the qualities you have of my own father. And I'm very lucky that from an early age, he would just say, just do the next right thing. And that's actually the motto of our company is like, hey, there's a big decision to be made. What am I supposed to do? If a staff member comes up, I'm like, well, just do the next right thing. That's just ingrained. And I think you've done that obviously with the police department. It's my understanding that perhaps from some of the research I've done, when you joined the police department or took it over or somewhere in the transition, maybe it wasn't as much of a positive culture as it is today. Yeah. Would that be safe to say?
Absolutely. Yeah. There was a time where there was a very negative culture.
So how do you come into a culture like that? How do you come in as the new leader of an organization that maybe does not have a good positive atmosphere and culture about it? What are some steps that you can take to start transforming that into a positive place where people actually want to be?
Well, and for us, it started actually from the bottom and working our way up. There was a time, there were a lot of officers that were leaving because the culture it really was toxic. We had some toxic leaders. I hate to call them leaders.
Yeah.
But I remember we had a sergeant and a field training officer that literally the day you walked in, he would say, "When are you leaving this blah, 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 blah place?"
Really?
A lot of expletives
Yeah.
in there, right? And so
what good does that do?
it does no good for your organization, right? And what it does do is it starts pushing people to look elsewhere because that's the atmosphere that you're working in. Very punitive, if you do this, it's always a punishment, right? It's never how are we going to make you better and how are we going to grow you? It's, I'm going to hit you with the stick and you'll either learn or you won't, right?
Very top-down authority.
Yeah. And so there was a time when a lot of people were leaving. My brother was at Boise City and was like, "You need to come apply over here. You need to come over here." And I had a lieutenant that said, "Hey, you're always complaining about the culture here. And we've got promotions coming up. So you can either run away and leave, or you can put your money where your mouth is, basically, and you can try to change it."
Yeah.
I was like, dang, that's
dagger to the heart.
It was really kind of a challenge. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I am. I'm going to promote. I'm going to try to change how we do things here. And so I promoted to sergeant and then started going and talking to other officers that kind of were thinking the same way and was like, you need to promote, put in and promote. We had an officer that was getting ready to leave, and fortunately for us, it had an injury. Mm-hmm. And so they were delaying his leaving our agency for another agency. And I went and sat down and talked with him. And I said, "Man, I understand that things are tough here, but you've got a place here. You've got a place in our organization. And you're a good person and you care about people. And that's what we really want." And he ended up staying.
Wow.
And he's literally the only person I've ever talked to about staying. Most of the time I'm like, if somebody's ready to leave and they think it's better for them, then I'm not going to talk them into staying. I'm going to explain to them why we're a great organization. But if you've made that decision and you believe it's better for you and your family, I'll support you in it because that's what's best for you and your family.
I want to pause there for a moment. And I want you to really dig into this because we have a lot of business owners in our kind of community that might watch this. And I find a lot of times that's not the normal leadership tactic.
Right.
So could you dig into that a little bit? Like when somebody's ready to leave, and they come and they say, "Hey, I'm thinking about," I think that's a lot like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, Z." You don't try to convince them to stay.
No, I'll lay out all the options and I'll ask them, "Well, why are you leaving?" And if it comes down to money and benefits, I can't change that.
Yeah,
I can't. And if an officer says, "Well, it's because of the money and the benefits," then I've got to go. And I'll tell them, "You know what? I'll support you in that then, because if I can't match that, and that's truly what you believe is best for your family, then you're going to need to go." But I'll also bring up to some of those people, I'll say, "Do you want to be happy where you work though?" Because I've seen officers leave and go for money and benefits and they're miserable.
Right.
And they've got 20 years left to be miserable.
Yeah.
And the money doesn't make up for that. And so we'll kind of bring them back to, hey, take a look at really the bigger picture. And sometimes you get people to take a look at the bigger picture and sometimes you can't.
Right.
But if that's why you're leaving, I can't help you. And we'll go out of our way to do a lot of things for people. We've had people that have come to work for us and they've gotten ill where they didn't have the benefits at the time, where we've literally went and petitioned to go outside of policy and get them the help and the things that they've needed, only to turn around and leave the organization after we gave all that to them. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's a lesson on the leadership side is sometimes you can't make people happy even by changing the rules. Never change the rules for one person.
Yep.
It doesn't make sense as an organization. And most of the time that person won't be grateful for the rule change anyway.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I have a lieutenant that he was like, but we did all that. And I said, you know what? And we'll do it for the next person. Yeah. Because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking for somebody to show you gratitude because you went out of your way to do this to help them, I go, you're doing it for the wrong reason.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work. If we're doing it for the right reasons and somebody still goes, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's fine, because I'm going to do it again because it was the right thing to do for that person, because I'm trying to invest in the people, not always necessarily in the process.
I think it's interesting that you don't really have direct control over, it's not like a private business owner where you can just say, well, sure, I'll increase your salary from 50,000 to 60 because you asked. I think coming out of this, I think my opinion's changing, and here's why. I would be an advocate of like, hey, it's a good person, just keep them around, do whatever. I think private business owners that will keep people by paying them more money as the primary reason that they're at the job, I think that's a detriment to their entire organization, because we are using money as a crutch. Well, they can't afford to go anywhere else because I'm paying them 80,000 and the best next job is 70,000 elsewhere. And then we as the leader, can rest on our laurels when it comes to culture. And you have to fight tooth and nail and say, well, I can't raise your income. And you could go work for a private business and make 10,000 more, but look at your life here and the culture that we have. So your side of the equation, not the money, it's how awesome is your life going to be when you're here with us. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely making sense.
You're changing my paradigm around this whole thing, so I appreciate it.
Well, because here's the other thing. So I'm going to give you more money. What about the next person that comes and goes, well, I'm going to run over here now. Oh, well, then I need to give you more money. And so for me, I'll find ways to reward those people that stick with us through the thick and thin, right? Through the ups and downs. Those are the people I want.
Loyalty.
Right? I want loyal people. If I'm going to be loyal to you, I want you to be loyal to me. And that's fine. If you decide you're going to move on, you're going to move on. But you know what? That's not the person I want to be in a foxhole with.
No.
That's not the person as a police officer I want to be in a gunfight with, backing me up. That's not the one when we go to the bar fight that I want with me. No, I want the one who's loyal to me and loyal to this profession. Because for me, and it sounds corny probably, but I truly believe that policing, especially the way when it's done right, is one of the most noble professions in the world. It is a profession where you miss out on kids' events, family events. You may give your life, be injured for somebody you may never meet and who may never appreciate what you've done. And you're going to get up and you're going to go do it every single day. You're going to get up and you're going to put on a bulletproof vest every single day. Yeah. And there's no professions in this country that are that way, right? They're not. Military soldiers is an extremely noble profession, but pretty rarely, unless they're in a combat zone, are they gearing up every day to go out and deal with people's problems and try to solve their problems with the chance of, going to a call that seems rather benign turns deadly like that.
Yeah. Why would somebody, I know there's like a recruiting shortage, when it comes in recruiting, maybe the wrong word, but like an attraction of candidates to become cops. It's kind of a shortage right now. Why would somebody want to become a cop? I get a lot of what you're saying, but I'm like, okay, it's kind of a hard sell in an instant gratification world right now. So if somebody's listening and they're young and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about becoming a cop. I have several people that I know personally that are considering that. Why be a cop?
Again, I think it's the greatest profession in the world. I really do. Because where else do you get, one, it's different every single day. It is different every single day. The expectations are extremely high on an officer. You should want to have to attack those expectations, right? It's going to make you better at your job and as a better person. The camaraderie that you have with the officers and the other employees within your organization, and that just tight-knit group that when if something happens at home, if you need help, they're going to rally together and they're going to show up. They're going to be mowing your lawn because you can't. They're going to be doing all of these things. There's this huge support network within the profession. Yeah. And then when you take a look at it and you go, well, what do I want to do? Well, I want to make a difference in this world. Yeah. This is a profession where you have an opportunity every single day to make a difference in somebody's life. Every day.
Like a real difference.
A real difference. An absolutely real difference. You may be the one who mentors that kid that's having problems at the school who goes on to be extremely successful because you were the adult who believed in them. You were the adult that was willing to talk to them. They may not have that structure at home, but they have it when they come to school and they see their school resource officer. Or they have it when you show up and you're dealing with a spouse who's involved in an abusive relationship, and you're the one that finally gets through to them that this isn't the way they should be living their life, and you get them the help that they need. Or the drug addict that you talk to and you know that you're going to be back dealing with them again, but you don't give up hope on them, and you try to give them the resources they need to be successful, and all of a sudden they make that decision and they are successful. I have a gentleman that I meet with that sent to prison for a murder, a homicide, and he got out, reached out to me through another gentleman that I had interactions with as an officer, and said, "Hey, when I want to meet with you." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know if you really want to," but and he goes, "Because I've thought about you from my very first day in prison. I've thought about you every single day." I'm like, "I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we're going to find out."
Where's this going?
And my wife was like, "You're not meeting with him." I'm like, "Oh, I'm meeting with him. This is going to be interesting."
I'm so damn curious now.
Yeah. And literally, and it was, again, things you don't think of. The first time I dealt with him, he was married to a spouse who was a DUI and was being abusive towards him and had their kid. And so I came on the scene and dealt with it a way that he thought was the way it should have been dealt with.
Wow.
Later, I started dealing
Even though
with him.
he went to jail for it.
He didn't go to jail. She was the one actually that was DUI and in trouble, and people weren't really listening to the whole story. And when I arrived on scene, I was like, "Okay, everybody, let's stop. Let's back this up. Let's take a look at it and see what we really have here." But then he gets involved in drugs, and he was a veteran and was dealing drugs and was using drugs a lot. And the thing that stuck with him was I had called his mother in Oregon and told her, "Hey, man, is there anything you can do to help him out? You guys need to get him out of here. He's involved in drugs. He didn't listen." And I told him, "You're either going to end up dead or in prison." Well, he ends up in prison. But just those interactions that didn't really seem like they were a big deal to me. They were just really me doing what a police officer should be doing with someone, trying to get them the help they need, even though they are committing some crimes as well, and you're sending them, they're in and out of jail, and made an impact on him. It was something
you
that he
considered
remembered.
something very small, kind of an everyday thing. I'm not like the hero of this story necessarily. It's like, but I'm just going to try to do the next right thing and call this guy's mom and see if there's any way that somebody could help him. You have like a heart, is what you're saying. Yeah. And it actually turned out to be a life-changing thing for him that he thought about every day. Yeah. While he was in prison.
And he's very successful now. He's out and very successful working with veterans, doing, trying to get them the help when they get released from prison. He goes and gets them all the resources they need. And so again, those things that we don't really think about and you had said it right, something that was very little to me. A gentleman by the name of Stephen Gower, I met years ago. He's since passed away, but he was a speaker. And that's one of the things he called them mega keepers for leaders, was what is unimportant to you may be the most important thing to the person bringing it to you.
Say that again.
What is unimportant to you may be the most important thing to the person that's bringing that to you. And I am so fortunate because my command staff, they're phenomenal. And I'm a very much, right, I look at some things, I'm like, that's the dumbest thing in the world, right?
Yeah. And
they'll remind me, "Hey, Chief, remember, what's unimportant to you may be the most important thing in the world to this patrol officer who just brought that idea to you."
Wow.
And I'm like, dang, you guys.
Yeah. Culture's working against me here, but in a good way.
So those things, right, are, you have to remind yourself of that. I have to remind myself of that all the time with your family, with your wife, with your kids, when you're like, "Why are you so upset? This isn't anything." And then I'm like, "Oh,
It could be the biggest
obviously
thing.
is a big deal, or we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I didn't know I was going to get marriage advice today, but I appreciate that. That could be huge. I mean, you're right. It goes to every single aspect of working with anybody. I don't like the word dealing with people.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's a negative connotation. It's like, but like working with people, we're all humans. We all have certain tendencies. And I love the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Just simple things, even as far as like just smiling. Like when you smile at somebody, in the elevator on the way up to work, or you get out of your car and you walk across the street and you say thank you to somebody, whatever. That's the stuff that really matters in life. We think we have to be the hero of the story and do something humongous today to make it a great day, when in reality, just make a very small gesture can change someone's day.
We literally just talked about that in a men's group that I'm in. And that exact thing, one of the guys was like, I haven't done anything great to be the hero of my story. And so the discussion we all had was, no, it's those little things you do every day. That makes you the hero in your story. The things you do for your kids, the things you do for your spouse, those little tiny things they stack up, right? Mm-hmm. We've all heard of and you probably read it, the tipping point.
Yeah.
Right. All these little things stack up, and then there's that final tipping point, and things blow up, right? Well, it's the same way for the positive things. Those little tiny investments that we do every day stack up, and then all of a sudden, you hit the tipping point on the positive side of things.
And the snowball begins to roll in the right direction. I mean, so you were a cop for how long before you became the police chief?
25 years.
About 25 years. Did you know all along that you were gonna, kind of rise the ranks, if you will, and become what you are now?
No. I mean, I thought about it. And again, I was someone fortunate or not fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. I ended up in the DEA task force, right? When we were a tiny little department, right? And they had just started a drug task force in the Valley out of the Boise resident office. And I get chosen to go work on the task force. I'm the only Spanish speaker on the task force at the time. So I'm getting to do a lot of cool stuff all over the Western United States, right? And then the the department starts to explode. So now there's promotional opportunities and at times promoted, in my opinion, every time I promoted I wasn't prepared for it. I never thought, I'm ready to be the chief, or I'm ready to be the lieutenant, or I never thought that. I always thought, we'll see how this works out.
Like it's a big step.
It's a huge step. And, but I think focusing on the important stuff really gets you through those things, not worrying about what the next pay bump is. I had a former chief from Nampa Police Department when I was being asked to be the deputy chief here at Meridian. And huge mentor of mine. And before I made the decision, I mean, I went to friends, I went to my brother, to all these other mentors, and was like, should I make this step? I'm pretty young to make this step. And he said to me, well, what does it pay? And I said, I have no idea. I haven't even asked. He said, then you need to take the position because you're doing it for the right reasons.
Wow.
And that
what does it pay?
Impactful.
I have no clue.
Yeah.
That wasn't your main motivation. You're thinking, man, it's scary to take a big leap of any kind, but you're in it for the right reasons. So he said, do it.
Yeah. And so that kind of, again, one of those little things you get from people that changes your view and how you look at things. And it's the thing that I think helps you be a better mentor to people. For me, people ask all the time, what's your greatest accomplishment as a police? I'm like, watching people around me succeed. I mean, it really is. People that you've mentored, watching them be successful, there's your greatest accomplishment. There's your legacy.
Yeah.
It's not your name on a building or your name on a plaque. It's what are those people doing that have come after you that you've helped mentor and you've helped bring along? There's your legacy, right? What are your kids doing? How are they being successful? How are they as people? My wife and I, we're very fortunate, and we say it all the time. We're very lucky. Our son is way better people than we were. and are way better person.
You can
We're
claim
very
some of that
fortunate.
credit.
I think so. I think because he looks at us because I don't want to be like that. I think be better than that.
You're too humble, Chief.
So those things they really are the best things. What's the best part of the job? People. What's the worst part of this job? People. It's the same thing.
It all comes down to people.
That's what that's what policing is.
Interesting. This is very helpful for me. I've never seen it that way. I haven't given it much thought, but you're right. I mean, it's just all about, the people. And you've done it very, very well. What are some things, whether somebody is a cop or whether somebody is young and they're new to business and you're a salesman, I can tell by the way you talk.
I couldn't sell much.
It's just the selling of an idea.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there and you're having conversation. You're helping people explore options and choose things like, should I go? Should I stay? I can tell that. So I mean that in the highest of compliment. So what could somebody do no matter what profession they're in and they're learning how to communicate better with other humans? Some it comes really naturally. Some it does not come naturally at all. First of all, do you believe that anybody can become a decent communicator?
Oh, absolutely. It's like anything else. You got to put the work in. You got to put the work in.
What are a couple steps that you would take if you're training a younger cop or a younger business professional on, hey, let's sharpen up some communication skills?
I'm going to tell them to go talk to people you don't know, sit down with them and learn about people. Learn what makes them tick. For me, that is be curious. Be curious. Ask people how they got to where they got, why they view things the way they view things. Talk to people that you disagree with. Talk to people you disagree with and learn from them and why they view things the way that they view things. One of the things we bring up to our officers, when you go on a traffic stop, you need to remember this. Our perspective as the police officer is completely different than that person's perspective that's being stopped. And so many times we get in this back and forth of, well, you shouldn't be mad at me because I stopped. And you get this back and forth argument instead of, we don't know what their perspective is. Ask them, why are you so upset with me? Why are you yelling at me? When you deal with somebody, large refugee population in this valley, right? When you stop and you're dealing with somebody from a different country, instead of saying, well, this is the United States and this is how the laws work here, how about ask them, hey, where do you come from? How did you view law enforcement there? Or how did the laws work where you came from? Learn from them first and then go, oh, well, here's how it works here. And have that interaction, right? You can't do that on every traffic stop, but you can do it on a lot of them.
Right.
It doesn't have to be contentious. Explain to them why you're there, right? When I stop you, I'm going to tell you the reason I stopped you today is because you were doing 50 and a 25.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to be, do you know why I stopped you today?
Yeah.
Do you know how fast you're going? Because then we started getting that back and forth with each other. When I tell you, most people are like, yeah, you're right.
You got me.
You're right. You got me.
That's interesting. I've been pulled over a few times in my young life for speeding. And you're right. That is, most of the cops will ask the question.
Yeah.
Do you know how fast you're going?
And I don't need you to admit it to write you a ticket. So why are we creating this conflict when we don't need to create this conflict? But be curious. For me, that is, be curious. Go talk to people. You want to get better communication skills. You get it by talking.
Yeah.
You get it by the back and forth.
Asking good questions. If I could reiterate what you're saying, you correct me if I'm wrong, but asking really good questions and seek first to understand rather than to be understood.
Yeah.
And I think you just gave a real world example of how that works.
Yeah.
Hey, do you know, how was it back where you came from, whatever country that was? How did you perceive that? Trying to understand, obviously we have a job to do, but you're going to get much better results with any interaction with a human if you understand their side before you speak yours.
Yeah. The difference between hearing and listening, right?
Yeah. you have two ears for a reason, right? And one mouth.
Well, and really be curious about why people stand where they stand. One of the things I have tried to really stress to my son, especially coming out of COVID and those types of things, was we can't live in an either this or that world. You can't. We have to be able to talk to one another and we have to be able to gain each other's perspectives. And I said, when you have those discussions with people that are different than you and view things differently than you, you might realize oh man, maybe I'm not completely right on this.
Yeah.
Or you might realize, man, they're completely whacked.
Right.
Right?
Like, no logic there.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no, I'm going to walk away and there's no way I'm going to agree with you at all, but we can do it in a very respectful manner. Or you may listen to them and go, I had that completely wrong and they're completely right.
Yeah.
Or they've changed my perspective a little bit and at least I understand where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. So really make that effort to learn why people are the way that they are and ask those questions and ask people that you know are going to disagree with you. Have those conversations. Those are the best conversations.
Absolutely.
Those are right. Those are the great conversations when you can really debate back and forth with somebody and you can walk away and go, okay, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes you're too far apart, and we'll see this in politics as well. Like sometimes they're too far apart and it's very difficult if nobody's open.
Yeah.
But what I think it's the Myers-Briggs personality test. I believe they talk about one of the scores being openness. Like how open to new ideas are you? How open to new perspectives? Yeah. If you're too closed-minded, like there is something good about being a little rigid, because like, okay, if you're rigid on the things that matter, like good morals and ethics, that's a good quality. But some people take it to the extreme, I've found, even in small towns, especially, where it's like, this is how the world works. There's no margin. I'm not willing to budge an inch on any of my opinions. What's to say that I have it right? You know, maybe I have 30% of this issue completely wrong and you have the answer for me. So I love going into conversations like what you're saying, going in saying, what if I was wrong? Let's play devil's advocate against myself. Yep. What if this person had some things they could teach me today? Because I believe everybody can teach you something. I mean, you've taught me 5 things already that I didn't know before we started this, and I appreciate that.
You hit it on the head, though. Everybody can teach you something. That's one of the things. So I'm very involved in martial arts, and there's always been this rigid. Well, this is the best. This is the best. This right. Like
schools of thought.
Yeah, and I'm like, no. Go and you'll learn something. You can get something. If you go with the intention of, I'm going to learn something today. And it may not even have anything to do with what you were going to learn about. But you go, I'm going to take something from this seminar or this class or whatever. You'll get something.
Sure.
It may not be the huge, mind-blowing thing, but you bring one little tidbit back and those little tidbits add up. Right. And they build your repertoire and they change your worldview of, well, I shouldn't just only do this. I should expand and do these other things to make myself better and be more well-rounded and, really open up your mind. And you hit it on the head right there when you said that.
Yeah. And you can learn something from everybody, but you also, like you say, can learn something from every situation. So, one of the things that one of my mentors said early on, and I thought at the time, I was like, man, I mean, this is self-serving for you to say this, but I believe it now. He goes, it's the student's job to learn from the master.
Yeah.
And I go, do I believe that? I don't know. And the more I think about it and the more I experience life, it's what you're saying. You could go to jiu-jitsu class and the teacher can be great, or maybe they could be pretty bad at their job. But if you as the student blame it on the teacher, no matter what category of life we're talking about, well, they didn't teach me very well, so I didn't learn a whole lot. No, you can always learn something, like what Chief Tracy's saying here. You could always learn something, any situation. I like to go into, if I pay $20,000 to go to some crazy fancy business course, right? And you're going for 2 days and you pay all this money. Even if it's a bad course, you can learn $20,000 worth of information in that 2 days if you search for it.
If you search for it, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the great things that too, when you look at, and I'll use jiu-jitsu because
my son's taking jiu-jitsu and my daughter, they're 7 and 4 years old. So I would love to learn more about jiu-jitsu.
As you move up the ranks, right? And there's these different people are like, oh, most people quit at blue belt, right? Okay. That's usually when you see people leave. They're like, man, because it's hard. And it takes a long time to go up through the ranks. But when you get, and then they're like, oh, I'm a purple belt. Oh, I'm a brown belt. And they're like, yeah, I'm there. And then I'm a black belt. I'm there. And I'm like, no, now our journey's just started, right? Because there's so much more to jiu-jitsu and the martial arts world, then if you think you've reached your point at black belt, you're wrong. You're just now starting your learning process over. And then you can learn from your students that come in, right? I mean, you should be learning things from the students that come in as well. They'll come up with a different perspective and you're like, why didn't I look at it that way? Or
you're never at full mastery.
You bring in, trust me, especially now with the way jiu-jitsu's gone, not going to complain too much, but right, there's not much, they don't work much from takedowns, getting people, for me to really use my jiu-jitsu on the ground, I got to get you there. Right. So
like practically,
so you got to be bringing in
scenario.
some Division I wrestlers and showing takedowns, right? Bring in some judo people and be working takedowns. Guess what? You may get punched in the face. Well, let's bring in some people that do striking and let's start implementing all of those things. You know, I think Bruce Lee really got it right. You know, take what is useful and you throw out what isn't useful, right? But you have to remember as well, when you are the instructor, when you're the one, you want to make sure that your students are learning the things that you know, but you don't want them to learn your biases, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And I'm super fascinated about this subject because I admittedly am not, like, you don't want me in a fight because I don't have a lot of experience there. Right. And I think that's such a weakness, if I'm just being honest and real with myself, such a weakness as a man. Look at all of history. It would be a good thing to know how to fight. Right. And how to defend yourself. Now I'm big on, Second Amendment and all that. And, we get into that at a different day. So I'm not totally helpless, but in an actual street fight, I would not be as much use as I would like to. So for somebody that's like me and they're young and they're listening to this and I'm talking to myself, what would you recommend? Like, where do you start? Jiu-jitsu? Do you start with something else? You know a lot about martial arts. Where would you go? Aren't you a black belt?
I am in jiu-jitsu and Kodokan judo as well. So.
Holy cow. So where should I start?
I will tell you this. How old are you?
28.
28. I'd start with jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, I tell people, the reason I say that is, trust me, I'm 55. At 55, when you go and you're doing judo and you're throwing all day, when you leave at night, your body's broken. When you leave jiu-jitsu after a couple hours, it's like, man, you just had a great workout. Man, you may have got beat up, you may have gotten throttled, but you feel good at least like when you walk away.
It's easier to keep going.
Yeah, and it really is a not nearly as steep of a learning curve, really, as throwing. I mean, learning how to fall and all of those things. And so, I mean, those are great arts. Jeet Kune Do is a phenomenal art. I trained under a gentleman by the name of Chris Kent. He's world-renowned guy, and that's really where I got the, hey, don't pass your biases on to your students, right? He was like, it's great to share what you've learned and what you know, but don't pass your biases on to them.
Like, keep their openness.
Keep their openness, like and let also them realize, for me, we talk about it a lot when I'm teaching. People are like, well, this doesn't work on this guy. Yeah, you're right. That guy's huge. You're not going to be able to utilize that. So you've got to figure out a better way to utilize what you know against a different opponent, right? It's not going to work for, but everybody's body types are different. What I can do, some other people can't do. What other people can do, I can't. I had a guy, one of my brown belts, the guy's tall, super long leg. That guy's throwing triangles on everybody, right?
Yeah.
I can't throw those triangles on people like he does, especially a big, broad-shouldered dude. It just isn't going to work. So I got to figure out what's going to work for me. And so don't just teach from your perspective, I guess, is what I would say. I would say, take a look at the class and go, okay, well, this is what we're going to work on today because this is what will help you, right? Oh, you're a big dude? Man, use your pressure. Use that pressure on people. Or, another guy that I've done some jiu-jitsu with, Matt Todd, he's a pretty big guy, was a rower in college, but he's really light and he just kind of floats. His style's different than my style. My style is more of that old school wrestling, let's grind you and make you quit because of the pressure we're going to put on you.
Yeah. And
so, but that may not work for everybody. So you've got to kind of figure out what's going to work.
That makes total sense. Do you guys use this? Do you use this in the police academy and stuff like that?
Yeah. So our most of our instructors, our arrest and control instructors, have at least some level of jiu-jitsu or a grappling art in their background. Cool. And the reason we really focus on that is I always tell everybody, listen, the public expects us to control somebody. They don't expect us to beat them into submission. Right? That's not what they expect. Doesn't mean
Say
you're
that
not going to
again.
punch
Say
somebody.
that again for the people that missed it.
The public expects us to be able to control a
control.
subject. They don't expect us to beat somebody into submission.
Yeah, which is what you see a lot in this police brutality
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. And a lot of times, even though they're right, we call it lawful but awful. It may be lawful what you did, but man, it looks really bad.
Yeah.
It looks bad.
Just because you
Especially
can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
And knowing these arts, that's very helpful in allowing them to use the right amount of force. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Without going overboard?
Yeah. So, again, I always tell everybody, again, when they stop resisting, we stop utilizing force, right? And ultimately, it's the subject who is going to make that decision for us, right? They're the one that is going to make the decision on whether or not we use force by their behavior, by what they say, by what they do, really is what directs us to utilize force. It should never be because of what we do. And even the courts now are starting to look closer at, well, what did you do pre-force? Right? Courts really look at the dynamic of what happens right at the time. Now they're starting to look at leading up to it. What did you do?
Interesting.
Did you put, I understand that person had a edged weapon, but did you put something between you and that? Did you know he had an edged weapon? Yeah, I did. Well, what did you do to mitigate that? Well, I placed my car between that suspect and me so that now it slows down his reaction time gives me more reaction time. If he tries to attack me, he's got to go over or through the car or around the car. What did you do? What did you utilize to try to de-escalate the situation, right? Did you just show up and you're screaming commands at him, or did you actually try to bring the level of stress down by the way that you communicated with them? Or, there's all those different ways that we look at de-escalation. And quite frankly, sometimes de-escalation is the immediate use of force.
Yeah.
Before you can
sometimes there is no reaction time.
There is no reaction. It's going to be, I'm going to immediately use force because I see exactly where this is going.
Yeah.
We recently had a situation like that, right?
Really?
Where a guy...
Can you speak to it?
There's a guy who's drunk and he's causing problems, and our officer gets there, and then the guy says, I've got a gun, and starts to reach behind. Our officer immediately hits him right in the nose and drops him and gets on top of him and controls him, and sure enough, the guy's got a gun in his waistband, right? Well, were you going to be able to de-escalate that situation? He just did. By striking him. Yeah. Right? He de-escalated the situation. And
if he would have waited, it would have turned into... It could have turned into a
shooting. It could have turned into with people around. Yeah. So the officer absolutely did what he needed to do to control that situation immediately.
Oh my gosh.
And what you see is people don't understand that because they don't live in this world, right?
Right.
They live in the world of YouTube and people narrating what they should think.
Yeah, and somebody clipped that and showed the very end where it was, they didn't say anything, got hit in the face.
Right, exactly.
So, well, you didn't see him say, I'm going to reach for my gun.
Exactly.
So these are like really quick, split-second decisions.
Absolutely. And that's what the courts have said.
Most people make decisions in their life, and it takes them forever to make any decision about anything. It's my pet peeve. I'm like, let's take immediate action. Let's quit talking about it. Let's go do something. I have my own set of problems. Don't worry.
Me too.
But that's not one of them, right? I'm like ready, fire, aim, in the real world. But when it comes to making split-second decisions, is this just in good cops, or do you have to train that into them? How does that work?
We train it. Yeah, we train it. We do a lot of scenario-based training. And so we put them in a lot of, right? You have a little Rolodex in there. It may not be the exact same situation, but you've at least seen something similar. And so now you know how to react or gives you a quicker reaction time. So we do a lot of scenario-based training. We used to not do a lot of that. I think really overall policing has gotten way better than when I got into it.
Oh, really? In what ways particularly?
Training is huge. Mindset is huge. When we got into it, there was always a scenario going through the academy. You never survived. Not one person I knew ever survived this. You got shot in this scenario every single time. So then we were rolling out police officers that every traffic stop could be a shooting. Well,
so you're coming into this thinking, I'm probably going to, you're on high alert that I'm probably going to get shot if I walk up to this car. Yeah. Which I could see where they're going with that. It's be extra careful, but 99% of the time, that's not the situation.
Exactly. And I always tell everybody, you can be nice and still be dangerous. right? As a police officer, you can be the nicest guy, biggest grin on your face, and you can be the deadliest cop I know.
You can be nice and still be dangerous. That could be like a life mantra, honestly. Like you can be a kind individual, but you can still be sharp.
Yeah, you can turn it on when you need to turn it on, and you have to pay attention to all those things surrounding you, but you can't be so over the top that you think every person's going to kill you, because that absolutely is not it's just not the way of the world.
Right.
It's just not. And so we've got to be grounded in really what we're doing, right? We can be prepared. We can be all of those things, but man, you can still be nice to people. And a lot of times the way you talk to them, the way that you interact with them may completely de-escalate the situation you've had, and realize, man, we're dealing with people at their worst moments most of the time.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. People make mistakes. They do things that, and once in a while, it's okay to give somebody a break.
Like 95% of the time or 99% of the time, this person is going through, they're managing their stress, they're doing all this, and then they go to the bar, they have an influence, chemical influence on their brain, and they hit rock bottom for a moment, and then you show up.
Yep.
That's a good perspective. I mean, honestly, it's like you don't know, just in life in general, you just don't know what other people are going through.
Exactly.
And why they're doing what they're doing, and they're out of their mind in this particular moment, but what led up to this situation. So most of life, I'm guessing, as a police officer is fairly normal day to day. There's always been something different, but I'm guessing like there's not huge shootings every day you're dealing with. There's not this, but there are some craziness. Like, what are some of the craziest things that you've dealt with? Like, whether it was an intense thing or maybe just like some dumb criminal that's like, doesn't actually have a brain,
No, well, I mean, we deal with, we have the shootings, we have the fights. We had an officer almost 2 years ago, almost 3, on Christmas Eve that was ambushed and attacked and beaten by a MMA fighter, could have ended very badly. Fortunately, it didn't, and other officers ended up responding, but it was a pretty mundane call. And those are the things that you have to worry about and be aware of, and keep your head on a swivel. There are funny things that happen over your career, for sure. There was a kid, I don't know why this is so funny, because it really shouldn't be that funny, but there was a kid that's always a problem child for us early on in my career. And I had told him, I said, hey, listen, I gave him a break and said, you need to, we're catching him out after curfew. I'm like, dude, if I catch you again, there's going to be some consequences here. And sure enough, we picked this kid up. Well, no, actually, we ended up picking his dad up for DUI.
Oh, man.
And his dad's out looking for him.
Oh, great.
And we pick him up. Well, then I catch the kid out after curfew and bring him in. And I'm like, boy, this night just got a lot worse for you. And he was like, well, what do you mean? Aren't you going to call my dad? And I was like, well, your dad's probably bonding out of jail right now because he was out looking for you. And he was DUI. He left the house to come find you because, once again, you snuck out and you're out after curfew. And I'm like,
you just cost your dad a DUI.
You just cost your dad a DUI. Now, Dad should have made better decisions, certainly. But, dude, really?
You're like, I'm the least problem in your life at the moment. Like, turn your dad loose on you for a second.
Those types of things. I mean, you get people that just do some crazy things. Christmas time, Thanksgiving, families get together.
Do you see a rise in that whole?
Yeah. You'll see the families when they get together and then mix some alcohol in, and they're airing, right? It's Festivus now. They're airing the family grievances, and we're getting called, and you're rolling in going, "Well, Merry Christmas, everyone!" One of the funny ones I got called. This is Super Bowl Sunday. And back then, they used to do the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. And they would show up at halftime, and someone would win the public. I literally went to a call, and these people were in this huge fight because they were convinced they were going to win the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. And then Ed McMahon never showed up at their front door, and they were arguing. He's like mad because, are you sure you sent it in? And they were literally convinced they were going to win it. And I'm like, how do you people survive every day when this is
Like if this is a big enough thing for me to be called into.
Yeah.
So some of it's just like
some of
petty.
it's just a lot of it's petty. A lot of it's petty, and you just shake your head. And then, of course, a lot of it's very serious. And
sure.
And
a lot of domestic violence,
deal with the
I'm
domestic
guessing.
violence, the child abuse stuff that our officers deal with, or it can be pretty tragic. There was a period of time. I was the acting chief at the time because our chief had gone to the National Academy, FBI National Academy, for 10 weeks, and we had just a series of murder-suicides involving husband, wife, father, and their kids. And it was all within this 10-week period. And I was like, man, what are people thinking? What are we doing here? And I would go out at the time. I went out on every single one of them because I was like, if my officers have to see it, I'm going to be there. So I'm going to go. And really, even then, the mental health things hadn't kicked in for law enforcement, really.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been, except for the last few years, that really we've realized we've got to get our officers help. I mean, we need to make sure that, and it's this cumulative effect.
Yeah.
And so we got to make sure that we're getting them the help that they need. And initially, officers were very reticent to do those things. And so trying to convince them that it's okay, talking to them and going, no, you know what? I go to a counselor at least once a year, even if I don't need to go.
Yeah.
I've been to a marriage counselor. I understand that you're having marriage problems. Well, guess what? You're probably part of the problem or a lot of the problem.
Yeah.
And you need somebody that's outside of your circle to tell you, hey, dummy, wake up and either take care of yourself or take care of your family or do those things, because it can become overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where really, when you talk about when I started as well, not just the training, but the mental health aspect has changed so much, and so much for the better. Back when I started, it was suck it up, go to your next call.
Yeah.
And
suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah.
Be tougher.
And
bury that.
And the only calls you need to go see somebody about is if you're in a shooting and you took somebody's life. Well, no, you know what? Those officers who are going to these baby deaths and are dealing with these things, they need to go. Those officers who were performing CPR on somebody and they died, guess what? Those things add up and weigh on them. And so now when we have those types of incidents, we do a critical incident stress debrief, where we bring everybody from that call that wants to be there. It's voluntary. They come in and there's a mental health professional in the room. We ask the dispatchers to come. If there were paramedics or firemen on scene, we ask them to come, and they talk about the call and they talk their way through it. And we've seen a lot of benefit from that. A few years ago, we went to the state legislature and we got post-traumatic stress injury covered under workman's comp. And we've had officers that have utilized that, and it's helped them come back to work, because that's what we want.
Yeah.
Right. They're not broken.
Right.
It's just like any other injury, right?
Nothing wrong with you because you have some emotions.
Exactly.
You're a human.
Exactly.
And I think it's cool that you're taking this leadership stance, leading from the front. You just graced over it, but like, if my officers have to see it, then I'm going to see it.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about the policing world, but I would doubt that's very common. Yeah. And so good on you for that. And the fact that like you're a man's man. I mean, you're a friggin' black belt in a couple different disciplines, and you're leading from the front saying it's okay that you're a man and you have emotions and that you saw some shit.
Yeah.
You saw some shit and it's not easy to see, and you can go talk to somebody. Yeah. You can actually talk to somebody about your marriage too. Yeah. You're not lesser of a man because you can't figure out how to make your wife happy in this scenario. You need to figure it out together. I'm a big fan of therapy as well, if you get a good one.
Yeah.
Good therapy,
absolutely. Yeah, there are some bad ones out there.
It's just like, it's just human development. Like, I believe in coaching in all aspects. Yeah. So thank you for the service that you do and the stuff that you guys have to witness is, no human should have to, but the world's not perfect. So here we are.
Yeah. And, and you say a man's man, but let's not forget our female officers. Because they're phenomenal.
How
it's a tough job. It's a tough job to be a female, no matter what. Just coming into the job, it's tough. And
What do you know the ratio there? Like roughly how many police officers in the area are men versus women?
I couldn't tell you totally, but with us at 153 sworn, we're probably looking at 7% that are females.
Is that consistent with when you started, or is that changed over time?
I think it ebbs and flows, and I think really we would like to see a lot more females represented in the profession, and it's just getting them through the door to test.
Yeah.
And it's really trying to convince females that this is a job for you.
Sure.
Because the female officers that I've worked with are phenomenal.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
On the judgment side, the empathy side, the communication side.
The communication side.
Yeah.
And some of them are tough as nails when it comes to the getting in a scrap. I'm like, you're going with me.
Yeah.
I want you there with me. And I think just society's kind of too protective sometimes of females. I think, man, they can stand on their own, and they do a phenomenal job, and we need to encourage them. They're coming into the workforce. Well, we want them in this workforce. Yeah. We want them working in policing, and we want them doing those things because they're good at it and they can be successful at it. And we want to see them be successful at it. And they're like anybody though. It's funny. There's some women in leadership courses out there, and we're always trying to send them so that they can talk to mentors and find mentors. But they're just like everybody else. They're trying to make it as hard on the person coming up from behind them, right? And I have to remind them, hey, your job's to make it better for the female that's coming up into this profession. A little easier for them to make it through the process. Right. Just because it was miserable on you, you don't want it to be miserable on the next person. That's a horrible way to look at things.
I walked uphill both ways with snow on the ground, so you have to too.
We all have that tendency, though, to do that. Right. Well, I had to do this, so I'm going to make you do that. Well, did you like being treated that way? No, I hated being treated that way. Well, then why are we treating somebody else that way? We want to make it better for those people coming in behind us. So let's do that. Treat
others as you would like to be treated, not, know, I'm going to treat you the same way that they treated me. It is interesting though. Like, I'm sure you guys see it all over, especially in the domestic violence stuff, is like hurt people hurt people.
Absolutely. Very true. And that's, I think probably you've heard me when we've had this conversation as well. I hardly ever say law enforcement. I've maybe said it a couple of times.
You're right. Well, why is that?
I'm very particular about talking about policing because law enforcement is a very small piece of what we do. And I think it sends the wrong message to the public when we refer to ourselves as law enforcers all the time. I mean, it's the fun part of what we do sometimes, but it's really a very small portion of what we do. Most of what we do really is helping people solve their problems. Yeah. Really, what we do as police officers is trying to make the community a better place to raise your family, a safer place for your kids to be out doing the things that they want to do. Yeah. So we need to really focus on the art of policing, not that we're law enforcement all the time. I love that. And that's just a personal perspective for me.
I think it's very unique and interesting. Who are so do you get some cops that are just like awful? Like who are the worst cops at the job? Like the ones that come in thinking that every day is going to be a shootout and they're just adrenaline junkies? Or like, tell me some stories about some of those guys.
The black and white cop, right? Policing is so gray. So great, right? If I stop you, and we give you a lot of leeway, a lot of discretion. I can write you a ticket. I can give you a warning. I can arrest you. I can do all those things. Maybe on one stop, I could do every single one of those things. So what am I going to do and why am I going to do it? I want people that can make decisions. The worst cops are cops who cannot make a decision. They are the ones who are on the phone on the way to the call asking their sergeant what they should be doing. Well, I don't know what you should be doing because you're not at the call. You don't even know what you have yet. Yeah. And those are the ones that don't strive in the policing world. You have to be able to make decisions. You have to be able to be empathetic, right? Every person stopped for speeding isn't committing a heinous crime, right? They're speeding. We've all sped. And maybe there's a good reason that they're speeding. We had an officer and he ended up getting out of law enforcement and it was the right thing to do. But we had an officer, he wrote a lady a registration ticket and her husband had passed away earlier that month, and her registration was expired by, it may have been expired by a month. I don't remember, but she just lost her husband.
Yeah.
I think she had a little more important things to be focusing on during this time. And he was so proud of himself that he wrote this citation. And it's like, you don't belong in this profession.
Yeah.
You need to
power
move
trip.
on.
Do you think some people have like a power trip
sure,
about it?
absolutely.
Just like, I'm powerful, so I'm going to enact my power because I can.
Yeah. It's one of the things that we'll see when you see things happen in different parts of the country, and there's riots and there's people that are upset, and they're talking about how they're policed and what their policing are doing in their area. And we'll get our officers oftentimes that are like, well, that's bullshit. That's not what cops do. That's not what we do. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. No, that's not what we do here.
Yeah.
But guess what? There are places in this country where there are racist cops. There are places in this country where there are cops on a power trip. There are places in this country where they're looking to go out and use force on people. Absolutely there are.
Yeah.
Just because we don't do it that way here doesn't mean that perspective elsewhere is wrong.
Right.
Because that's what they've grown up with. That's what they've interacted with. And for me, when we look at different events, when you look at the George Floyd event, right? If that event had happened 5 years earlier, I don't think you see the riots that you see in Minneapolis. What you see is over time, these events start adding up and adding up and adding up and adding up. And then George Floyd was the tipping point where people were like, we've had enough. We've seen enough of this type of policing over this period of time in our community that there's your tipping point.
So do you think on the subject of police brutality, I guess we'll just call it that, right? On that topic, obviously you have some people over here that are like, maybe more traditional old school, like cops got to be cops, let cops be cops. The media is the problem, right? So you have that camp. Then you have this other camp over here that's like, no, the police officers have always been the problem, and there's all this stuff. I mean, where do you kind of lie on this spectrum, or maybe educate me on that whole spectrum?
So again, we're talking about this or that, right?
Yeah.
It's either this or it's that.
Yeah.
Well, the truth is, it's right here in the middle. Let's take a look at it. Can we police better? Absolutely. Yeah. Can we do things better? Absolutely. We should be learning from other agencies, their mistakes. We should be learning from those, and we should be creating policy, and we should be creating training so that we don't have politicians that have no idea what we do in our job telling us how to do our job. Use of force is ugly. You will never see a use of force where you're like, that was it looked so good, just like in the mat room when they were practicing. Yeah. No, the human dynamics are different. If you've ever been in a fight, it isn't pretty. It's ugly.
Yeah.
And people have these huge high expectations that police can just do anything, right? They've watched too much Lone Wolf McQuade or whatever, and they think that everybody's Chuck Norris. When you realize that the amount of training that a police officer gets every year, while we have a lot of training as an agency, it's not all on hand-to-hand combat, because we've got to have legal updates. Yeah. We've got to learn our tactical medicine. We've got to learn on how to deal with people with mental health issues. We've got to, the things that a police officer does is so broad that if I wanted to get a police officer the training they needed in every one of those things every year, we would quadruple, if not 10 times, raise the size of the number of officers in your agency, because your officers would be training at least every other week in some discipline to be where everybody expects them to be, but they don't want to pay for it either.
Right. Well, you're not paying cops $500,000 a year.
So,
you're not going to go out and you're not going to be able to triple the number of cops so you can have that much more training. And so you're dealing with a budget.
So it really comes to perspective. And yes, cops make mistakes. Does that mean every cop needs to be fired because their use of force was bad? Absolutely not. Yeah. Right? There are some high stakes, and there are times when officers need to be terminated, and there are times when officers need to be sent to remedial training. Right? And we're going to send you to remedial training so that you can be better at and more confident in your arrest and control techniques. We're going to send you to remedial training so that you can learn to communicate better with people. For me, it is a pretty clear line, and I tell every single officer, I sit down with every person that comes through our door that we are going to hire as a police officer. And I tell every single one of them the same thing. Your quickest way to get fired from the Meridian Police Department is to be an asshole. That's your quickest way out the door with us. Treat your peers poorly. Go out and treat people in the public poorly. And you can't learn from it. We will help you find a new job somewhere else where that is more acceptable. But you won't work here.
Oh, I love that. And it kind of comes down to like something that I always tell some of these business owners that we consult on their marketing and stuff. Is I say, look, all employee issues come down to one of two categories: skill or effort. Yeah. And, the asshole thing would be in the effort category, in my opinion, right? And it's like when you're evaluating somebody, like, should they stay or should they go, right? Or should I hire this person or should I not hire this person? Hiring and firing, it's like I like to evaluate and just go down the checklist. Are they putting in the effort and they just don't have the skills? Then I'll be a softie, to be honest. And I'll keep somebody longer than they probably should, because it's like they're showing up on time. They're not leaving early. They're reliable. They're good for the culture. They're positive. They want to be a team player. They just don't have that skill yet. Well, we can train skills. But the second somebody, is the most skilled person in the world and they have a terrible attitude and it infects the rest of us, nobody wants to go to work anymore. So that person needs to go. The
only two things that I can't control in you is your attitude and your effort. When my son left to go play football in college, I was like, that's the only... You can go be the guy that sits around and gripes and nothing's going to change. I go, or you can be the guy that shows up every day, happy as can be, and is putting out the effort that you can put out, as much effort as you can, and people will recognize it, and people will notice you. But every day when I wake up, I'm like, when I go to work, I don't go, oh man, I got to go. I'm like, my attitude is I get to go to work.
I get to go to work.
How are we going to make a difference today? My friend used to say that all the time. He was a great guy. He passed away recently in a car accident.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But he would say, you would call him, and the last thing he would say before he'd hang up with you is, make a difference today. If you left, when his voicemail came on, he'd be like, hey, this is Rocco. I'm not in, blah, 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 blah. Before you were leaving your message, it would say, remember, make a difference today.
Make a difference.
And the guy made a difference in so many kids' lives in this valley. And he was a construction guy. But he was involved in so many youth sports and just so many kids. I told my wife, I'm not sure I remember going to their house when somebody else's kid wasn't there.
Wow.
There was always somebody else's kid at their
houses.
house, right? And he just made such a difference in kids' lives. And my sons included, gave him his first job in construction. But those things, right? Your effort and your attitude changes everything. My son, when he got his construction job, I said, hey, Antonio, I go, remember this. I go, your last name's Bastarachea. You're Basque. We have a really good reputation for being hard workers in this state. That being Basque opens a lot of doors for you in the state of Idaho. So when you go to work today, you remember that when you're putting in that effort. And he looks at me, he's like, thanks a lot, Ita, no pressure. And I'm like, I'm just telling you.
You represent, right? You
represent our family and you represent Basque people. So you go put in the effort and you show them that you belong there working for Rocco. And that is one of those things that so true that my dad just drove into us, right?
It's generational.
Your name and you're Basque and you better work like you're Basque. Go out there and give that effort. And we laughed because I was working construction and this guy, the superintendent said, hey man, that guy works pretty hard. And he goes, oh, well, he's this Basque. I go, oh, that explains it. And then totally blew it off, right? It was like, well, if he was something else, that'd be a big deal. But he's like, oh, that's expected. No big deal.
Of course, that would be that way.
And that's what I expect out of my son, right?
But what a legacy, what a reputation to have. You're going to have a reputation. You might as well instill a reputation in your own children to say, hey, this is who we are. And it's a good quality to have.
And be happy.
Yeah.
Be grateful. Man, I wake up in the morning, go through my gratitude list. What am I grateful for this morning?
Oh, I love that.
That's first thing.
Do you write it down or do you just think about it?
I just go through it. What am I grateful for today? I'm like, okay. Then it changes your perspective when you get up and you go to work, right? You're ready to go to work because there's all those, and there's something we can be grateful for every single day.
Every day. Even the worst of days.
Yeah. Even the worst of days.
You can make a good day.
Yeah. Because you know what? They're putting an obstacle in front of me and there's the thing I need to be grateful for. There's that obstacle that I've got to figure out either how to go over, through, or around. How am I going to respond to it? Not how am I going to react to it? How am I going to respond to it?
Respond. Well, it's interesting. Like I love your grit, and also you have a positive grit. There's a bunch of guys out there on the internet that are like, they have the grit aspect, but it's so negative. It's like, you get up because you don't want to be a POS and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, let's just take the testosterone down about 100 notches for a second. I love that you have that. It's a positive grit. And you think that comes from, like you said, your upbringing as being Basque and your dad? Like, is that where some of that comes from?
I think it comes from really the community I grew up in.
Yeah.
Because there were so many people that just wrapped their arms around you, right? They wanted to see you be successful. I think it's one of the great things about small towns.
Yeah.
People want to see small town kids be successful.
Yeah.
And they celebrate your successes maybe more than you do. And that's a neat thing. Yeah. And you want to know one of the traits I hate, the worst trait a leader can have? Somebody that's not willing to celebrate other people's successes. Right? The person, when he sees somebody else being successful and they go, yeah, but did you know this about them? How about, man, great job. You did a phenomenal job. I'm glad to see that you're being successful.
Why do you think people do that? Like, why do you think people insecurity?
I think they're measuring themselves against somebody else instead of measuring themselves against who they should be measuring against. Are you becoming a better person today? I shouldn't be having to compare myself to someone else. I tell it to our jiu-jitsu guys. Like, don't worry about how good this dude is. Are you getting better? Or are you better this week than you were last week? That's what you should be worried about. Those small little steps. Guess what? You got submitted 10 times last week. You only got submitted 7 this week. That's progress. Great job. Great job.
What a fantastic leadership trait to train that. I see so many people, especially in the technology, social media age that we live in today. It used to be when you were neighbors with somebody, you were living up. I don't know a world like this, so I'm basing it off of my understanding of what it used to be like. The Joneses were next door, and they bought a new Mercedes. So now, if you're going to compare yourself to somebody, all you got to do is get a Mercedes. If that's the game you're going to play, which you shouldn't. But then it's like, okay, now today you have these young adults and kids that are on their cell phone, and their neighborhood is now anybody in the universe that has another phone. And they're comparing, well, that person's in Hawaii right now, and that person just bought a Lamborghini. Well, that person is a completely different set of circumstances than you, but your neighbors are not just Sally and Joe down the street anymore. It's anybody that has a phone. How do you kind of see some of that affecting the younger generation, especially?
Well, it's funny because I did a talk one time on bullying, and it wasn't on bullying, and it wasn't quite what our mayor at the time thought it was going to be. And my supervisor at the time was a little nervous, but my whole thing, I blame all these issues that we are having with kids on us as adults. I do. And when it came to the bullying thing, I was like, how many of you, when you go tell an adult, it is actually dealt with? Not a kid raised their hand. I go, you want to know why? Because the adult's too scared to call the bully a bully because they're afraid that the bully's parents are going to come in and bully them and I go, we're failing as adults. We are failing as adults. And the other way we fail as adults, we give these kids unrealistic expectations. And I told every one of those kids, and I said, I got news for you. This idea that you can be anything you want to be in this country is a falsehood. You absolutely cannot. You can be the best that you can be, the best that your potential can bring you to be. But there's other people are in different spots. Stephen Gower, again, you say we don't all run at the same pace and we don't have the same starting point. Guess what? If you grew up in an affluent home and a loving home and they have money, you're going to have a little bit better step up in life than the person that's struggling in a low income neighborhood and just trying to get by? Absolutely. Or do you think you're going to end up in the same place? Chances are probably not. And if I'm not as smart as you are, am I going to be further ahead in school than you? No, probably not. Listen, I'm 5'0". I'm never playing in the NFL. Right? I'm not, but I can have realistic goals. So let's start telling our kids realistic goals. And I think it is, you can be as successful as you want to be. in whatever field it is. And I don't care what that field is. But guess what? Some of you don't have the aptitude to be an astronaut. You don't. I'm not going to be an astronaut. Just not going to happen. I don't have the aptitude.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why would I give you the false idea that you could be? Let's
or
get
even
you on
that
a path where
necessarily
you can
need to want that.
Absolutely.
Like, what's wrong with working?
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with working a normal job but being the best at that?
Exactly.
That's an
absolutely
interesting perspective.
I mean, and
I come from the generation. Let's be honest. I come from the generation that would be more apt to, be on the other side of the fence and be like, you can be anything you want and do anything. And I think maybe where my distinction lies, I'm curious on your take here, is having the attitude you have about realistic expectations and stressing the idea that most of life's success, let's call it in business or leadership or any of this, most of it are learned skills.
Absolutely.
So just because you can't play in the NFL, which most of you want to do, let's just be realistic with right now.
Yeah.
Just because maybe you won't be the next person to be the next Michael Jordan in the NBA, that's a physical thing that you may or may not be able to change that much. But most of success is showing up and working hard and not quitting and taking immediate action and learning how to talk to people. Would you agree with that sentiment?
It's your drive. It's your drive.
And that can bring you very, very, very far. But to your point, there is different starting points.
Back to a jiu-jitsu analogy, we always say a black belt's just a white belt that didn't quit. Right? They kept coming to class every day. Some days it was miserable. You're getting smashed. You're getting smashed and smashed. And then, but guess what? And even the guy that was smashing you or gal that was smashing you a year ago, they quit at blue belt. And they're no longer doing jiu-jitsu, and you stuck around and you kept going. And now all of a sudden, guess what? Now you're a purple belt, and now you're a brown, because the person that success was pretty easy to, because they were a good athlete walking in right off the bat. All of a sudden it started getting a little harder. Maybe they moved on. Maybe it wasn't as fun for them now that things were starting to equal out, and you stuck with it and you kept on that trajectory.
Nothing beats burning desire and I'm not going to quit.
Show up every day.
Like, there's a grit.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Well, Chief, I don't want to take all of your entire day here, but what are you working on as we kind of get to the end of this podcast? Like, what are you working on right now? How can we find you online or however and support, what you're doing?
Well, the one thing that we're always working on, and we reiterate it all the time, is getting better. We want to be an organization that other organizations look to on how to build a culture. And when I say that, I don't mean just police organization. I want other organizations to look and go, how do you guys do what you do? Why is your culture positive? Why is it that you have somebody walk in and they tell you it felt different when I walked in the front door of the Meridian Police Department compared to the other police departments I've walked into? Or it was different when I got in a patrol car with your guys to do a ride along, or your gals. It was just different. It felt different. That's your culture. It's that feeling that you get when you're there. And so that's what we want. We want to be able to continue studying culture and studying leadership, and how do we get our employees to be better, and how do we make our organization better. And so we're working on that every day. And then outside of that, we're working on different projects, right? We're looking at technology. What does using a drone as a first responder look like for the Meridian Police Department? How do we leverage technology better so that we can lessen having to have as many police officers as we continue to have because we're growing? Can we leverage technology to make it so that we don't have to grow so big? One of the things that we've done is we have a fairly large community service officer program, which is they're not sworn police officers. They don't carry a gun. They carry maybe a baton, and they carry some pepper spray, but they go out and they answer tons of calls that that leaves our patrol officers out to be able to do the things, right? The traffic enforcement and answer those hot calls and the family fights and those things. And so we're looking at expanding that, because there's a lot of opportunity for civilians to really be part of that same brotherhood and sisterhood, just without the increased risk. So maybe that's more attractive to bringing some people into our profession.
So you're getting creative on the recruitment shortage.
Yeah.
Because somebody might listen to that and be like, oh, chief wants to replace police officers with technology. Like that could be like a thing.
Sure.
It's like, well, no, I don't want to replace the people that are currently on the job. Yeah. We don't have enough people as it is. Yeah. So if I can't recruit more people in, how can we use technology to do that?
We heard the same thing when we hired a mental health professional to help us with our mental health calls. Mm-hmm. And people are like, oh, they're going to all get killed because they're going to send them to... Most of the time, when the call comes out and it's someone in crisis or something like that, most of the time we have enough information to determine, do we really need to send police officers there armed with guns and doing those things? Or do we need to send a police officer there with a mental health professional to be able to relate with this person?
De-escalate.
Right? And there's a whole huge difference between being suicidal and homicidal. Yeah. Completely different.
From a danger perspective, from everything.
From everything. And so let's figure that out. And guess what? It's working great. Our crisis intervention team's doing phenomenal. We want to expand it. Again, it just comes down to money again.
Yeah, money and budget.
Yeah, and so we're working on those things. We're currently in the legislative session. So as a member of the Idaho Chiefs of Police Association, past president, down there a lot, testifying on bills and trying to make things in state code better for our police officers in the state, better for our citizens, help keep this state safe. There's a reason people are always moving here.
Yeah.
And it's because of the state that we've built, and let's figure out ways to continue to keep it safe and continue to make it an attractive place for people to come. And that's our focus as the Idaho Chiefs of Police Association. So we're down at the legislature a lot.
I'm sure it's a big piece.
And, and trying to block some bills that maybe aren't so good that nobody seems to think that they need to, talk to law enforcement about when they're passing certain bills, and then we get it and we're like, whoa, let's tap the brakes on this because this could get our officers in trouble. Or
like boots on the ground is different than sitting in an armchair legislating. And you can't hardly blame some people, but you're like, if you thought about it from the boots on the ground, like what's actually happening, it would change your perspective a whole lot.
Just reach out and ask us. We're more than happy to meet with you and talk to you about it and craft something sometimes that we may not even be completely in support of, but it's the least of the bad.
Right.
And so let's help us craft some of those things for you so that it's something that we can all live with at least.
So, we've talked about a lot of things, but when it comes to like the Gen Z, that's kind of who I'm focused on helping and asking questions on behalf of our generation. It's like anybody that's in their 20s right now, basically. Anybody that's in high school, college. In our world, what do you see as being some of the biggest like problems or challenges of this generation, and what can we do about it?
The big one, communication, especially when it comes to the law enforcement side of things. A lot of them don't know how to read body language. A lot of them don't know how to communicate very well verbally because they've done it so much through electronics. We had a person that didn't make it out of our field training officer program, goes to a house to make contact, knocks on the door, the person answers the door, and the officer just stands there and looks at him. And the person's like, what do you want? And the officer's just looking at him. And he's like, you came to my house. You knocked on my door. What do you want? And then he was like, and he, stumbled through this communication, not a hot call, not a big, but just that
could respond when spoken to.
Yeah.
And didn't know how to initiate.
Didn't know how to really initiate it. And so that's one of the things in our academy we really look for and we really stress is that communication piece. And we run them through a lot of scenarios to be able for them to communicate and to be able to communicate so they're not condescending to somebody, right? Yeah. Actually just communicate back and forth. And again, we talked about, right, get to know somebody or their situation. That's a big one. Again, the not being able to read body language because they haven't done it. They've sitting right next to somebody and they're typing back and forth or they're just not having those interactions like we used to have.
Just a lack of conversation, like a lack of reps.
Yeah.
Like, I think because like you and I are sitting here, and we love this, but like I've always loved conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel like that's part of it is like so much is just done through chat that it's physically changing the way
Absolutely.
Your brain
there
perceives communication.
there is no doubt about it.
Wow.
And I think you'll see studies coming out that say that. And we've seen how just even gaming can change how the brain is made up by just gaming all the time. I mean, there's lots of scans out there that show that. Now, it doesn't mean it's not reversible. It's definitely reversible.
Yeah.
And I even noticed it with my son. And to where now we're like, no, we're putting down the phones while we're driving. We're going to have a conversation. And he's very fortunate because he's in a small college setting in Montana where their classes are small and they have to have these conversations. And so now when he's home, we have these phenomenal conversations about policing and just the way of the world. And what we'll do is we'll say, I'll tell him as we're driving, say, hey, you know what, pick something out of the media and we're going to have a discussion about it.
Oh, cool.
Just pull something up, pick a topic, and we're going to have a discussion. And let's figure out why you may think one way, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I'm going to talk to you from a different perspective. And so we'll do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that's lacking. The other thing is they don't want to stay anywhere very long. We're such a move from this to this to this world that it used to be when you come in, police officers, they may change agencies once, maybe twice at the most, but they're probably going to go to maybe a second agency and stay the rest of their career. Or they're staying with the agency they're at for the rest of their entire career, 30 years, right? Now, they'll come in and they'll be like, I figure I'll be a police officer maybe 4 or 5 years, and then we'll see where I want to go. See where you want to go. It used to be, well, I'm going to promote to sergeant, or I want to go to detectives, or they're like, I don't know. I'll just go to another job.
And do you think that's just a function of just so much information being readily available at a rapid pace?
Man, I wish I knew that because I'd be a really rich man. But
yeah,
I don't. I think it is. I think that one, there's instant gratification,
right,
with things, and so that idea that you have to struggle a little bit to get something to be successful. You know, one of the things I like is, let's go hire a small town police officer from small town Idaho. Yeah. Where he's the only one working because he has to communicate. Yeah. Right. Let's go find that deputy that maybe comes from a smaller area. Because he's the only one out on the road in the middle of the night. And he's got to make a decision. Am I going to try to arrest this person for is this violation important enough for me to make an arrest, or is this one that I just let go and make a decision because I'm going to be in a fight with this great big old cowboy from Owyhee County, right? Yeah. How do I communicate and talk him into handcuffs into the back of my car? Yeah, that's right. They have to communicate. Different scenario, right? They have to communicate, and so in today's world, we just don't see that communication through the school system. I think it's phenomenal now that they're taking cell phones away from kids in the schools. Yeah, me too. Right? They're making them put them away, and now you're going to have conversations. And one of the senators was talking about it. He introduced a bill to make it a statewide thing, and he talked to a girl at a school that said she'd gone to school with this group of kids for however many years, and she didn't know some of their names until they took the phone away from her, and she had to actually pay attention to these kids in her class. And I think that is really what is hurting us. And I think it's something that I noticed when we would go to the Basque Country that was way different than here. They weren't all on their phones all the time because internet's more sporadic over there. It's expensive over there. So they're having to have those communications and those types of things. And just culturally, they're expected to interact. It's intergenerational as well.
And that's so good for people. And the addiction of a phone. I mean, I heard somebody say the other day, they're talking about this subject, and they said, look, if you are addicted to alcohol and you give it up for 24 hours and you think about it a couple times during the day, you know that that's an addiction. Yep. Try giving your phone up for 24 hours. How many times do you think about it? More than the alcoholic that thinks about alcohol, more than the coke addict that thinks about cocaine, you're going to think about your phone more than those people think about their desired drug. And that hit me so hard. It's like, it's not just the younger generation. They're the ones that have it the worst. It's all of us
It is.
are addicted to these damn cell phones.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's on purpose.
Yes,
it is on purpose.
It is on purpose.
Right? And it's a business just like anything else, but it's changing the way this generation actually, their cognitive brain function.
Yeah.
And that's something that I want to figure out. How can we train that? I think something I learned from you today is like the reps are so important. The way you guys train decision making. I never thought about decision making being something that you can actually train. I believe communication can be trained, and we're working on helping Gen Z with that. But like, how do we do drills on decision making, on communication, different scenarios? So I think I'm going to build that into our curriculum. Thanks to
Malcolm Gladwell writes about that, being able to become a decisive decision maker. And it's one of those things. And I see people, it's like, dude, just make a decision, right? Because I'm like, I'll make a decision like this.
Yeah, it's like, what are you waiting for?
And I'm somebody, and it drives some of our guys mad. I don't want the backstory.
Yeah.
I don't want the backstory. My wife, she wants to tell, I don't want the backstory. Just tell me what I need to know.
Just get right to the heart and let's make a decision.
And I have a lieutenant, and God bless him. He has to tell you the backstory. And I'll be like, just tell me what you want. You tell me what you want. I'll tell you whether or not yes or no. And then if I need more information, I'll ask you for more information.
Bingo.
But my captains, God bless them, have said, hey, don't forget. What's unimportant to you is important to him.
Okay.
So sometimes you got to listen. Not all the time, but sometimes, because I'm like, just tell me what you want, and I will tell you what information I think that I need to move forward.
It's a good lesson, though. It's like, don't oversell. I come from a sales background. You don't need to oversell. Sometimes, like, you might just say yes. Yeah. And then they're like, well, I didn't tell you all the details. Well, don't talk yourself out of it.
Yeah. No.
Come ask the question. I love that. Ask the question. If I would rephrase this, I'll say yes or no. If I need more information, then I'll ask for the backstory.
Exactly.
That way we don't come across like the traditional brother-in-law hunting story that everyone talks about, where it's like a 4-hour hunting story.
Well, it was like my son when he sent us a message, and he says, I've got this great opportunity to live off campus. And I'm like, oh, here we go, right? This great, and it actually ended up being a great opportunity for him. But my initial thought was, really, what story, what yarn are you going to spin for your mom and I? Your Alma and I are going to look at this and go, really, kid? But it actually was. But
it turns out pretty well. I'm on a warpath to help Gen Z figure out how to communicate better, how to make quick, good decisions. Do you have anything that we haven't talked about yet that would be helpful for that? Like, how do we drill that into this generation?
Ooh. Well, I think it is. It's through repetition, right? It's here's a problem.
Like mock scenarios.
Come up with the solution. It's one of the things we do at times. And when I would sit on oral boards, we would give somebody never been a police officer. We would give them a police situation, and I'd tell them, just walk me through it, and I'm going to ask you why you made the decisions you made. And some of them would walk through and just be, and you're like, how did you come up with that? And they'd explain how they came up. And some of them may go a different direction than I would have, but I'd say, well, but why did you make that decision? Because I just wanted to see what are they thinking? Are they actually thinking through the problem? And so that was one of the things that when I would sit on our boards that I would always try to get is I want to know how you got to where you got, because I know this, the way I get somewhere isn't the way a lot of other people get there. But they got there. Yeah.
The twists and turns of the way you made that decision. And we might have actually made the opposite decision, but if I can track the thought process, I can maybe see the point. Because again, it's not all black and white. Most of life and most of policing, it's the same thing. Most of it's a gray area.
It's how we try to look at use of force. Take a look at that use of force, and now let's deconstruct it from where the force occurred backwards and get to the decision points and ask, could you have made a different decision here, and would it have changed the outcome better or worse? And then go back to the next decision point.
I love that.
Did we even need to get to this point where we used force, or could we have diffused it much sooner by just making a different decision? Doesn't mean they were wrong even. Just means, could we get better?
Right.
And that's what we want to do is get better.
It's all in the gray. Very, very little of real-time decision-making is black and white. Now, there are some things for sure. Like when it comes to morality, I do believe there's black and white. But most of life, you're in the gray trying to figure it out. Should I be a doctor and go through 8 years of school and rack up a bunch of debt as a 18-year-old to 25-year-old? Or should I go skip college and go into sales? Yeah. well, I don't know, I chose the second route, but does it mean it's the right thing? Not necessarily. It just means it was different and it came to a different conclusion.
And it was the right thing for you.
Sure. And somebody else might be like, oh, I should be an accountant or whatever. So anyway, I love that framework, applying a lot of the policing stuff, surprisingly to me, not to you, but surprising to me, applies to most areas of life. It's decision-making. It's being quick on your feet.
But I would say that the same is true for the private sector and policing. Mm-hmm. One of the programs we developed, and we've been talking about bringing it back because it had such great reviews, is we had a program called Emerging Leaders. And we brought in leaders from different sections of the community. I think we brought in one police leader. We brought in a friend of mine who was a Bronze Star recipient for a military kind of view of leadership. And then we brought in all kinds of different leaders from the community. We brought in a executive chef. We brought in a business person who wrote a book. And when they would talk about leadership, our officers were like, well, this is the same as, yeah, exactly. That's what we're telling you. Don't, no offense to Jocko and all those guys, but you don't have to go look at a Navy SEAL to learn about leadership, right? You don't have to go to the military to learn. You know what? Bring in some coaches. Yeah. Bring in some teachers. Bring in some of your business leader, and you're going to find out leadership's leadership.
Yeah. All the small truths with a lowercase t go back to truth with a capital T. Yeah. You know, it all derives back to, I won't get too faith-based here, but I know we both have a faith background. And I believe that all things that are true go back to truth with a capital T. You know, and so that's why, it's no surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise to me that these leadership principles are 100% in line with everything.
But it was funny because, like I said, our officers they loved that program. And and at the time we had actually, every single person in our department had gone through it. And then we had some staffing issues and just growth. And now we're like, we need to bring it back, because then they realized we're all on the same page. And I think it helps them realize as well that the person that I stop may be a great leader. Yeah. Right. It's not just some guy on the street that for whatever reason is getting pulled over. I mean, really changed perspective of who we're dealing with, really. And to treat people like I want to be treated. Just do the next right thing. There's so many awesome principles out of this, and I just appreciate your time. No, my to come pleasure. Out and talk about things. I have one last question. You mentioned a ride-along several times. Yeah. What are the odds I could get a ride-along with somebody sometime? Is that like 100%.
Oh, sweet.
100%. Yeah,
all right.
Get you out there.
We'll make that happen. For sure. Hey,
awesome.
Chief, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.